If your native language is Italian like mine or English, and you've already learned languages like Spanish, Portuguese or French, and then you decide to explore the magical world of Slavic languages, you suddenly realize it's a completely different universe. The grammar is intimidating, the words look impossible to remember, and the logic feels alien. If that sounds familiar, trust me, you are not alone. Hi everyone and welcome to Andrea Marino Polyglot Experience. This is Andrea here, and in today's video I'll talk about how to learn Slavic languages properly, especially from the perspective of someone who comes from a Romance language background or who speaks English. These are languages that don't have the same level of grammatical complexity as Polish or Russian, and that's exactly why the first steps can feel so overwhelming. I'll also share my personal experience learning Polish and Russian. I actually started learning Polish first a while ago, completely by chance. I wasn't even planning to learn a Slavic language. At that time, however, I was already a committed language learner. During my PhD, I was also working part-time in an Italian restaurant, and many of my colleagues were from Poland. I started hearing them speak Polish and instantly fell in love with the sound of the language. It goes without saying that I wasn't able to understand anything at that time. For that reason, I decided to give it a try. I bought a book, I started watching Polish content on YouTube. I used Link and even tried Duolingo for a while. One book that really helped me at the beginning was Polish for Dummies, quite practical with a good balance between dialogues and grammar. And because I work with Polish speakers every day, I could immediately practice what I learned. One thing I realized very quickly was just how difficult Polish grammar is. Polish, for example, has 7 grammatical cases which change the endings of nouns, adjectives, and pronouns depending on their role in the sentence. And then there is verb aspect, another huge topic. Every verb has 2 forms. Imperfective for ongoing or repeated actions, and perfective for completed actions. And if that weren't enough, every word seems to have dozens of variations. Take the word pies, dog in Polish. If you try to memorize all the forms across 7 cases and singular and plural, it's a nightmare. Polish also has plenty of exceptions, so rather than memorizing endless tables, it's much better to learn through examples, notice patterns, and remember phrases in context. That was a big lesson. Don't memorize grammar tables, observe grammar in use. Once I grasped the basics, I immersed myself in Polish through podcasts, YouTube videos, so I consumed a huge amount of content. And later I started practicing with language exchange partners on Tandem. I am never tired of repeating this. You need to speak and write. You need to work on your active skills in order to truly activate your vocabulary. Then at some point I decided to start learning Russian. I was attracted by this beautiful language, by the Russian culture. I start from zero using Duolingo at the beginning just to learn the Cyrillic alphabet and some basic words and sentences. And the alphabet was fascinating, completely different, but learning the alphabet, it only takes a few days. It's not the real challenge. Of course, you'll need to learn the sounds, the pronunciation, and so on. The real advantage was that thanks to Polish, I already understood the logic of Slavic grammar and could recognize a lot of similar words and structures. At the same time, I sometimes mix them up, just like learners do with Spanish and Portuguese, for example. It's normal and it improves with practice, especially when you focus on active skills like speaking and writing. Another tricky area, both in Polish and even more in Russian, is verbs of motion and verbs of position. In Russian and Polish, you need to choose between several verbs depending on how and how often you go, and even by what means of transport. And then there are the verbs of position, which describe how something is placed or positioned. These distinctions don't exist in English or Romance languages, which makes them feel overcomplicated at first. But again, the best way to learn them is to observe them in real context, not to memorize endless lists. Furthermore, Russian also has its own pronunciation traps, like the mobile stress, which can move depending on the word form, and the letter O, which sounds like A when I'm stressed. So with Russian, I faced similar challenges to Polish. Cases, aspects, verbs of motion and position. Another important thing that I completely forgot about, prefix in verbs, which is another hot topic. But I already knew how to approach these things. At the moment, I'm sitting around the B1 level. I'm conversational, I make lots of mistakes, but nonetheless, I'm working towards B2. So that's been my experience with Polish and Russian so far. Two fascinating but demanding languages. I'm speaking from the perspective of someone whose native language is Italian, who also speaks English and several other Romance languages. For people with this kind of background, Slavic languages can feel alien. Their grammar, pronunciation and logic are on a completely different level. But for native speakers of another Slavic language, the learning curve is much smoother. If you're learning a Slavic language, remember this. Focus less on memorizing tables and more on immersion, patterns and practice. Notice how native speakers use the language, learn from examples and speak as early as possible. In another video, I'll share my favorite resources, the podcasts and YouTube channels I recommend, especially for those who have reached at least a lower intermediate level. For now, I'd love to hear from you. Are you learning Polish, Russian or another Slavic language? What's your native language and what challenges have you faced? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. See you soon.